Hey, War Pugs. So, the Hive Mind wanted me to check out something, and it's done by PancreasNoWork, and it's why people hate Space Marines and how to change that. Now, I don't hate Space Marines that much. I do wish that we get a lot more stories from other perspectives, besides, Inquisitors, things like that. One of the things I really like about Vox and the Void is he often tells stories from civilian perspectives. And I actually would like more stories told from that kind of point POV when it comes to things. So, we have that general idea of what's going on and why. Most of the stories we hear from 40K are from a militaristic standpoint, with some civilian side characters, but they're not really the main focus of the story. Maybe I'm just alone in that regard, but that's what I'd like to see. But this is why people hate Space Marines and how to change that. So, let's get into it. PancreasNoWork, guys. You know I like this guy. Let's go.
So I will admit before going on, the title may or may not be entirely accurate. But before you accuse me of clickbaiting, I assure you it's inaccurate only because my brain cells are all on a rotating shift and half of them called off this week. And hated is kind of a strong word, it's just the best I could think of. When I think of hatred, I think of that edgy game that was all over the news a few years ago and then completely disappeared off the face of the earth.
There were a couple of games that were like that. There were so many games that just flashed in the pan and then were gone just because somebody didn't like something that was in them.
Any former Yugoslavian state's opinion about the other former Yugoslavian states. It's something passionate and rage-fueled, you know? And I don't personally hate the Space Marines, and I don't think most people would go so far as to say they hate them. But at the same time, the Space Marines have a level of animosity towards them that other factions just don't have. It's like a mixture of hate, annoyance, and jealousy towards the faction. It isn't bursting at the seams, like when someone mentions they like Elves or that Dark Souls 2 is actually the best Souls game, but everyone else is just too stupid to see it for the masterpiece it is. Instead, pretending Dark Souls 3 wasn't scratching the bottom of the barrel for the last of the series' creativity. But if you say something like, yeah, I don't really like Space Marines, most people that bother to respond to you will probably agree or at least fail to disagree. At least that's my experience. So because every time I start making a video on a game, I forget just how long a process that can be between recording and Sony Vegas crashing every time I think about it.
Brother, learn to quick save. Learn to quick save. I have.
See why people hate or at least dislike the Space Marines and what could be done to fix that. First off, like I said, I don't dislike them. They're easily the most iconic thing about Warhammer, and if you deny that, then you are just blatantly fooling yourself. They're the face of all the marketing for a reason. They're iconic, they're simple to paint and put together because of their relatively large size for a mini, and the fact that a lot of their models have tons of empty space to easily paint and put heraldry on, whether it be of your own design or existing chapter in universe, and they just look cool. At the risk of overusing the word, the old Firstborn Marines are goddamn iconic, and while some people dislike the tactical Primaris look, I personally think it kicks ass, and at the very least they don't have the proportions of a political cartoon. They're regularly updated and have something for everyone in the lore, from barely loyal psychopaths to courageous heroes to insert culture you find cool here in space.
Yeah, you can... Oh. The Minotaurs are just absolutely beastly. I'm just saying, the Minotaurs are absolutely beastly. I would love to make a custom chapter, but I can't paint anymore, guys.
And Romans.
As if I could actually paint before.
Vikings and Mongols, and okay, I'll cut that out.
Yeah,
so with all that, why dislike them? Well, the TLDR of it is more or less the incredible favoritism, though there's a little bit more than that. The least valid reason, in my opinion, is that a lot of people see them as a beginner army. They're all over the marketing and the releases, and hell, even Games Workshop stores are plastered with them. Combine that and their relative ease to use, and they're naturally going to be the guys newcomers to the hobby are drawn to first. So a lot of people view them in the following light. You come into Warhammer, you start collecting Space Marines, and eventually you're supposed to move on to another army. If you don't, and just instead stick with Master Chief on steroids, people look down on that. I say this is the least valid because if you like an army, who cares if it's the so-called beginner one? The big scary man wearing a truck worth of metal kicks ass. I shouldn't be crazy for saying that. But there's other reasons too, of course. I mentioned annoyance and jealousy, and yeah, I do think those are the reasons, but as much as jealousy is generally a stupid and petty thing, honestly, I think it's well-founded here. Every time the sun rises...
I think everybody that got into the hobby, their first thing they're going to buy is a set of Space Marines. That's gonna be it. And like he said, you're supposed to move on from that. Or you don't. Completely up to you. Some of my favorite players, I can remember the guy that played Orcs in San Diego. I can remember the first time I learned about the Sisters of Battle, and I started buying minis for that. I can remember a guy who played Tau. I can remember several people that played Tau that were really annoying, but that's neither here nor there. I can remember this one dude who had this Eldar army that was legitimately annoying to play against, but he was always fun to play against because he made you think about every single thing that you did. He played Eldar so right, it was ridiculous. I can't remember a single person that played Space Marines. Like, I can remember individual armies, but I can't remember anybody that actually played Space Marines. I don't know why.
This is a new Space Marine model or kit is put into production. They get major releases way more often than anyone else.
Right.
Even when another faction is in the spotlight, there's always time to throw in a few Space Marine models along with it. Can't let them go without their equal attention cake after all. So it's a little hard to say someone like a Tyranid player is in the wrong for being jealous of the Space Marine minis when he still has the botched circumcision of the Red Terror to work with. Yes, I'm reusing the circumcision joke. What do you want from me? Creativity is hard. And while every army has old as fuck models that really need an update, the Space Marines, unlike the others, frequently get replacements for them even if they aren't outright updates of the model in question. It's hard to feel pity for the Space Marine player who's complaining about his favorite character still being an old resin model when I look at the 12 other roughly equivalent ones he has available in plastic.
Right.
Before going to scroll over to the Phoenix Lords and Aspect Warriors who still look like this. And yes, I'm aware they're getting an update soon and this is probably going to look real petty in hindsight, but remember it took 20 plus years for some of these bastards to get one. And while it does make sense to do this because the Space Marines are so easy to design,
Okay, look at this chaplain. That looks so good. God, I wish I could paint.
I mean, the template is just dude in armor. All you have to do is slightly redesign the shoulder plate and add a different looking sword, and presto, new release. That doesn't exactly make it fair. That's another thing with these releases the Space Marines have. They come out so frequently that other factions end up looking like they have severely limited rosters when they really don't. To use the Eldar again, because they're a good comparison and I can play favorites too, they have 56 different items on the Games Workshop store page. Compared to the hundreds of Space Marine options, that feels highly limited, and it gets even worse when you consider that a lot of chapters have their own unique models, and the craft worlds don't get anything like that. It really isn't limited. There's something in the Eldar for all sorts of playstyles, and this is coming from a Craft Worlds player. But it's hard not to feel slighted when the other guy's getting twice as many toys as you and still has the balls to complain about it. When half of all releases are Space Marine, then people are going to feel some animosity over being left out. But just in case you thought it was only the model side of things pissing people off, there's all this wonderful lore to alienate non-Space Marine players with too. I open a book featuring the Space Marines, they're going to win. I open a book featuring another race, and the Space Marines are going to win in some way if they're involved. A major event in the setting happens, and there's a 90% chance that the Space Marines are going to win, or at least be incredibly important to the overall story of it.
Right.
And even this wouldn't be so bad if they weren't portrayed with such insulting favoritism. Remember when a 10,000-year-old wizard was trying to awaken the god of the dead and the Space Marines happened to be nearby, so obviously it was going to fail? Business as usual, really. And that's all the time. They just win, and that's that. Nothing important can happen without them, and they're not going to fail whatever the event is. Now, to be fair to the Space Marines on this point, they are the elite of the elite. They're super soldiers designed by God. They're going to be good at what they do.
Yes.
But it's frustrating because they repeatedly win over and over again until the whole thing about the Imperium being on the defensive in a desperate losing war seems like a blatant lie. How is the Imperium losing?
I was going to say something about the scope on the bolter pistol, but at the same time, that goes without saying, guys.
Time I blink, another minor Space Marine chapter wipes out a Tyranid high fleet with a quarter of its available resources. If 500 Space Marines get deployed to a battle, half a chapter, that's made out to be a massive deal. That is very much an Avengers level threat right there. The problem is, those 500 Marines are going to win because they're made out to be invincible. How am I supposed to feel like they're fighting a losing war when every time they get deployed in the hundreds, they wipe the floor with the enemy, and there's roughly 1 million of them in total? There's being the best of the best, and then there's Games Workshop bending over every other faction for the Space Marines to make them look cool. And you know what? Since I play Eldar, I once again have a direct comparison to make between them and the Space Marines. Aspect Warriors are Eldar who spent hundreds, potentially over 1,000 years mastering their specific way of warfare. They live day in, day out, focusing on nothing more than their path of war. They are, in theory, the ultimate warriors, at least in their specialty, and yet they do not achieve an ounce of what the Space Marines do. 500 dire Avengers would do nothing compared to what 500 Space Marines could achieve. And they do essentially the same thing as the Marines. They both spend all their time in battle or training for battle, making sure they're ready for the next fight no matter what. They're both heavily limited in number, with the Eldar being a dying race and there only being so many Space Marines in the Imperium. And then the fight starts, and oh look, the Aspect Warriors got creamed, despite the Eldar having on average better tech than the Imperium, but that's a whole other can of worms. And yes,
not on average. They do have better tech.
Sad Mech fans, I said on average. I know. Once you start looking for it, I don't think it's that hard to see where the jealousy and animosity towards Space Marine players come from. I mean, for God's sake, the Stormcast Eternals were the Space Marines leaking into fantasy.
When I first saw oh god, I hate I hated the end times in Warhammer Fantasy for a reason. The second I saw the Stormcast Eternals, I legitimately blew a gasket. Like, why? You don't need Space Marines in fantasy.
I like the Stormcast, and from a lore perspective, they're pretty different, but from a tabletop and model perspective, yeah, this was the Space Marines managing to be the favorite child in Fantasy 2 somehow.
Right.
Not nearly as blatantly, but still showing how Games Workshop can't let go of the Space Marines no matter what nowadays. There's more, of course. The Horus heresy is one thing that personally comes to my mind as a good example. Now, I'm not complaining about the Horus heresy being Marine-focused. There's plenty of in-universe and meta reasons for it being that way, and I'm definitely not saying it's bad. It's incredibly fascinating seeing all these characters that were once nothing more than legends playing out their roles in an era long lost to myth by the time of modern 40k. But where's the other faction's massive book series? The Orcs have the Beast Saga, which is cool, but it has a fraction of the amount of books the Horus Heresy does.
Right.
And the other factions have cool novels, but no epic saga for their origins. There's no novel series about the war in heaven for the Necrons, Eldar, and Orcs, despite it being the reason the Chaos exists, which in turn is the reason the Horus Heresy exists. I think that'd be pretty fucking important to flesh out a little bit, don't you? And while I'm aware it's a time that's supposed to be lost to myth, so is the Horus Heresy. There's no Tau saga about the Ethereals uniting the planet and what it was really like.
Can we get a Tau saga about 25 nukes drawing on their home planet and turning them all into steaks? Personal request.
Before they showed up. It's just, yeah, there were 4 nations because Avatar The Last Airbender was cool, so here it is in sci-fi form, and they always fought, but then the Ethereals came along, and now it's all good. That's more or less what the Tau have. Why don't they have more? Or a saga about the Eldar daring in immediately after the fall.
I would love that. That would be an awesome book series to read. That would be an absolutely amazing book series to read. Just the Eldar pre-Great Crusade. I think that would be a absolutely amazing book series to read. Just from a sheer perspective of the empire that was losing it all.
Desperately trying to persevere in the aftermath of their colossal fuck-up. None of those exist, but the Space Marines get dozens of books about their origin story, and an entire separate game in the form of the Horus Heresy rules and models.
Right.
This isn't having a favorite child, this is one of your children living in a palace and the rest in the dumpster outside Denny's. So as much as the last several paragraphs were me complaining to hell and back, hopefully I did in a way that you can see that, yeah, there's reasons people might dislike the Space Marines. The jealousy isn't unfounded, nor is the annoyance when the Space Marines win again, because that's all they're ever allowed to do. So how can you make the Space Marines seem like less of the favorite child? Well, the ways to do it are simple to say, but
make them lose.
Hard to put into practice. The worst way to do it would be just to cut the amount of Space Marine releases, and I really don't think that's the answer. That'd just make the Marine players angry, and it's incredibly lazy to diversify your setting by putting less stuff out for it. But making new models for other factions in the same vein as the Space Marines get them is a great way to do it instead.
Oh, yeah.
Don't just redo old models for the Guard or the Nids, make new ones for them. You can take any army from history, give it some sci-fi aesthetics, and bam, new Guard kit. Or the Eldar. Don't just redo the old aspect warriors, make new aspects. Make another Wraith model or some new types of vehicles. There's several different variations of Terminator armor, why not have several different variations of Wraith Guard? Some factions like the Tyranids might be a bit more difficult to do this with because you might just end up recreating something that already exists by accident, but it's by no means impossible. When Games Workshop releases a new model, instead of instantly making another Marine one, maybe they can go to other factions first, then the Marines. Go Faction A, Faction B, then Marines. Instead of Faction A, Marines, Faction B, Marines, more Marines, Faction C, Marines. The Stormcast way of releases is, in my mind, the ideal way to do it. They definitely get a bit more love than the other factions, but not in a way that feels like it's to everyone else's detriment. As for the lore, well, this in particular is easy to put a band-aid on, but hard to truly fix, if only for the amount of effort it would require from the writers. In the short term, just have the Space Marines actually lose. And not just the Emperor's Cumrags chapter in the middle of scenic buttfuck nowhere in the corner of the galaxy, a chapter with some actual meaningful lore significance behind it lose. And before someone brings up 500 different examples where they do lose, they need to lose in a way that actually sticks. And it shouldn't happen to a chapter whose entire shtick is, God, don't they get the shit beat out of them all the time. Having the Lamenters feature in a series of books where they once again continue to be the butt of all the galaxy's jokes doesn't count. Have the Ultramarines go into battle ready to show the enemies of man what's what, and have them get obliterated. Have them barely come out of the fight alive. Have the Black Templars go on crusade once again, only for them to actually be outmatched and they have to spend time recuperating, instead of there being a bullshit anime power-up moment and some named character remembers what he's fighting for and solos an entire army.
The worst example for this for me was in the book about Sotha, where Gendor Shrivok led a group in Karan'Kul of the Night Lords, led an ambush against the Ultramarines. The build up to this ambush was amazing. And the Ultramarines were going to die anyway. I mean, that otherwise there's just there's nothing else there. It was a bunch of Night Lords against a small number of Ultramarines. And this ambush was legitimately getting me nervous as I was reading the build up to it. I was just like, oh my god, because it was the Night Lords, and they can't read any life signs. There's nothing there, and then all of a sudden, it's like, one of the guys says, like, they could be all around us. They could be looking at us right now. And then all of a sudden, one of the guys in charge says, we are, and then the ambush is on. Within a sentence, within, like, not a paragraph, not a page, not 2 pages, like, legitimately 7 words later, the Ultramarines are completely recovered from the ambush and are now beating the Night Lords. And I just sat there, I paused it, I set it down, and I was too pissed off to continue for about 10 minutes. Because I was like, you've got to be shitting me. You've got to be shitting me. Stop it with this ridiculous need to make them look so good. Like, there should be, at some point, something that makes other forces look good. Just saying. That one in and of itself infuriated me, because you had this amazing build-up to an eventual slaughter that was going to happen, because the Night Lords just vastly outnumbered the Ultramarines that were encountering them. And you had this great build-up to this absolute slaughter, and then all of a sudden, not even a sentence later, the Ultramarines are in these heavily disciplined ranks and returning fire and retreating in lockstep and all this other kind of stuff. Like, it just didn't matter. All this build up, this atmosphere, this setting, and then all of a sudden, done. Completely and totally pointless to do. They would have just been better off saying, we're right here, come over here, let's start fighting. Because that's essentially what it boiled down to. It was so frustrating, I could not continue reading the book. For about, I don't know, every single time I picked it up, I put it back down because I was so pissed off.
Just wipe out the Space Wolves, get rid of them. I'm not explaining that one, but that's just a short-term solution. Having them lose is necessary, but it doesn't solve the greater problem of them having far more lore than anyone else, and at worst, it can seem like GW overcompensating, and it could just end up looking silly. For the long term, more books have to actually get released for other factions. The Guard books are fantastic.
Yes, they are.
From Caiaphas Cain to Abraham Lincoln, there's some quality writing. Make more of them. More books like them, I should add. Give the other factions their own epic origin story like I mentioned earlier. To my mind, while the Horus heresy is great and portrays the feeling of an empire desperately trying to stay together as brother fights brother, it doesn't really have a truly apocalyptic feel to it. Maybe that's an issue that can't really be solved because we know how it ends, but that's my takeaway. But a book series about the Eldar after the fall, that can really dive into what it was like and just imagine it. It's not about a dying empire or one that's going through some real stressful growing pains like the Imperium. The Eldar Empire is dead and gone. There could be books about the Eldari that are in complete denial and acting like nothing has changed despite all evidence to the contrary, and everyone else is desperately trying to figure out how to survive in this galaxy that was once at their beck and call and now wants nothing more than to wipe them out entirely. Consider truly dark tone for it, because while we know the Imperium isn't going anywhere, beyond the Craft Worlds and Dark Eldar will be the only things left, anything could go for the Eldar. Maybe in the immediate aftermath, a few minor factions of Eldar could spring up only for them to fall to infighting or Slanesh demons. There's tons of potential there. Or again, scale.
There is so much potential for that story. That's literally the best idea I've heard in a long time. I want that after the Horus Heresy. I want to read about the fall. I want to read about how that happened.
Way back to the War in Heaven so we can see what it was like during this.
It could something about the fall could actually redeem Eldrad Uthway in my eyes. It could redeem Eldrad Uthran in my eyes. It could absolutely 100% do that.
this time of heroes that make the Primarchs look like children. I mean, we already know the Infant and the Divine was good. Me saying it was like saying the sky sure does have a sun in it. Everyone knows it's a good book. But give me more good books about the Necrons. I want more, goddammit. The difficulty here again lies in the effort required. The Horus heresies have been going on for years now, so anything like that would take a while to work on. Plus, you can release all the books in the world, but if they're written like shit, then it's not really gonna help, is it? Keep CS:GO away from them, please. No more Eldar torture porn. Alright, there's only so many ways I can say give people more book series, so let's wrap this up. I probably hit the 8-minute mark by this point, right? Space Marines are cool, but the reasons people might dislike them are varied and for the most part fairly justified. Give everyone else more releases, give them more books, and overall, acknowledge that the setting isn't Space Marine 40k as much as some people might like it to be. Don't cut back on Space Marine releases and books because at best that's lazy and at worst it's just biting the hand that feeds you. Bring everyone else up to their standard. And while I'm asking for all these things, it would be nice if Games Workshop executives would personally come to my house and make me the head of the company. And also if I could win every lottery from now until the heat death of the universe.
Yes.
It's about as reasonable as everything else I've asked for here so far. Thank you, of course, to my channel members. You are the Space Marine releases to my Games Workshop web store, keeping me bloated and fat compared to everyone else. Thank you all for watching, and take care out there.
Let's see what he says at the end.
Seriously, though, just get rid of the Space Wolves and I'll be entirely happy with that alone. Worst fucking chapter.
I'm Jason.
Guys, once again, I find myself in absolute agreement with PancreasNoWork. It's one thing, like, for me, when I am watching something, I don't want to watch somebody I agree with 100% of the time. Unless they're talking about lore. Then I want to agree with them on the facts of what happened. When somebody's doing what PancreasNoWork does, which is where he expands on the lore, he talks about what would work and what doesn't work, and, you know, how things really match up, and he's doing theory crafting, I want somebody that I agree with 60% of the time. At, 60% of the time, I'm happy with. Especially, and the one thing I like the most about PancreasNoWork is he doesn't bullshit the lore. He doesn't. I have seen some people that do that, and I just don't like to watch them because I don't like a disingenuous argument. I don't like that at all. PancreasNoWork doesn't do that, and I find myself in agreement with him, and even better, he has managed to change my mind on things on more than one occasion. He couldn't do that with Eldrad because I really hate that knife here. I hate him, and it's not going to change. But that was literally the best idea for a book series that I've heard in a long-ass time. A pre-fall, like immediately before the fall, Eldar series where it covers from immediately before the fall, everything that preceded it, the whole 9 yards. I want to know, because it would be glorious. Guys, if you think it would be a good idea, put a like in the comment section down below. Leave me a comment as well. Go check out PancreasNoWorks. Check out more of his stuff, because I tell you, he's one of those people that it's just good stuff all around. Except for his opinions on the Eldar. And you know what? Nobody's perfect. And he doesn't want to nuke the Tau, which, again, nobody's perfect. Guys, thank you for spending some time with me. Warpugs. Yeah. Check the links in the description down below, and I'll catch you guys next time. No, seriously though, nuke the Tau.